Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I've got a card for you using Lawn Fawn's Bicycle Built for You, Critters Down Under, Butterfly Kisses, and You Are Sublime. So I stamped the images I'll be using on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. Before I get to the coloring though, I did want to just quickly alter this image. I'm penciling in some stripes on her legs to give her some stockings, and then I'm going to take a Memento Tuxedo Black marker and just go over those lines so that they are a bit more prominent. And then I can jump in with the coloring. So I'm actually going to be coloring only her legs and a little bit of her dress for today. In case you didn't notice from the thumbnail, I'm actually creating a scene from The Wizard of Oz for our current Lawn Fanatics Challenge, which is inspired by a book, movie, or song. My favorite movie of all time is The Wizard of Oz, so I wanted to recreate the scene where Dorothy's house falls on the Wicked Witch of the East, and that is how Dorothy ends up getting her ruby slippers. So I colored in the dress with N5, N7, and N9. And then I'm going to use just the N7 and the N5 to color in the black stripes on her tights. Then for the white stripes, I'm going to switch to N1 and add a bit of shading with that and just let that fade into the white cardstock. And then for her ruby slippers, I'm going to go with R24, R29, and R39. And starting with the R39 and then blending out with the R29 and then using the R24 for the highlight. So next I wanted to add in some foliage because there is some foliage right next to the body of the Wicked Witch of the East that you can see after the house has fallen on her. So for these first few leaves I chose YG05, YG07, and YG09, so I would have like a nice fresh looking plant. And then after I colored in all of that, I went back with the YG09 to add a bit more contrast to the line down the center of each leaf. And then for the grasses, I'm going to go with G21, G24, and G28. And first use the G28 to give some shadows and some definition. And then I'm blending up with the G24 and then filling in with the G21 for the highlight. And then for the little climbing plants, the ivy looking plants, I'm going to use YG41 and YG45. This time I'm going to start with YG41 and just color the leaves in solid. And then once I'm done with that, I'll go in with the YG45 and add just a little color closest to the stem so I get a bit more contrast. And then I decided that I wanted something a little bit fresher on the ends of the grass to kind of bridge the gap between those brighter leaves and the duller ivy looking leaves. So I added in YG03, and then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. For the background, I'm going to take a couple pieces of Bristol. On this first one, I'm going to recreate the yellow brick road, which you can see in that scene. So I'm going to start by covering this panel with some mustard seed Distress Oxide ink. This is going to be the lighter of the two shades. And I'm not going to cover the whole thing because I actually only need like a little bit of this to show. Then I'm going to take the brick stencil and hold that firmly in place. You can also tape this down if you prefer. And I'm going to bring in some fossilized amber Distress Oxide ink, and I'm going to go right over that. So the actual bricks are going to be just slightly darker, and then you'll get the lighter bricks in the grout. But it'll just give you that look of the yellow brick road. So I wanted a little bit more of that, so I'm just lining up that stencil once again and then adding a bit more to complete that. Then I'll set that panel aside to dry, and I want to work on the grass that's in the front of the scene then. So now I'm going to take another piece of Bristol and cover that in some Twisted Citron Distress Oxide ink. And once again, I don't need the whole panel, just a little bit of it, because the yellow brick road is going to cover the bottom right corner. So I just left that part bare for me to hold on to. And then I'm going to darken that up with some mowed lawn, just bringing that in from the top and a little bit on the left-hand side. And then I'll go back over with the Twisted Citron to kind of blend that out a bit. And then I wanted to darken that up even further, so I'm going to use Rustic Wilderness. I've really been loving the three of these green tones together lately. I think they add a really nice like highlight and depth in them combined. And then I'll just go back over the transition areas to make sure everything is nicely blended. And then I'll set that piece aside to dry. And then I'm going to take a piece of white wood grain cardstock to create Dorothy's house. But the house in the film is quite dingy looking, so I'm going to distress it with some pumice stone Distress Oxide ink. So the house has been sitting out there in rural Kansas for probably quite some time since it's had a paint job. I imagine the house was one time white just from the look of it, but it's pretty kind of dingy gray beige looking in the movie. So I'm just blending that on and trying not to be like too perfect with it because I want it to look more like it's been sitting out there in the dust storms and stuff like that. Making sure to press some of that ink into the cardstock so it gets in the grooves, and then I'm going to trim that into a couple strips. I didn't know how many I was going to need, so I just trimmed it up as equally as I thought I could, and then I'm distressing that even further on the edges to kind of create a little bit of delineation between each of the boards in the siding. So I'm just going on the top and the bottom. The sides don't matter because they're going to run off the edge of the card as I place them down. So I'm just mainly worrying about the top and bottom of each of those planks. And I even did that funny looking scrap piece just because I wasn't sure if I would need a little bit of that or not. Then I took one of the large cross-stitch square stackables and die cut the grass piece out of that, the yellow brick road, and then also a piece of thin white cardstock. And then I used the simple stitch hillside borders for the curve of the yellow brick road. So I'm going to use that thin white cardstock to just adhere all of my pieces down to, and I'm going to start with the grass. So I'm just making sure that that is flush with the bottom and two sides of the card. And then I'm going to layer the yellow brick road down in the bottom right corner of that. Then I'll take my images and I'm going to position the Wicked Witch. I had to trim off her hair so that it wouldn't kind of hang out from underneath the house. And then I'm going to glue her down. I mainly just put the glue behind her head because I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted her to lay just yet. And then I'm going to lay down the first plank of Dorothy's house. I didn't want it to be too much at an angle, but definitely at a slight angle because that's how it is in the film. So I just position those, and then I'm going to continue layering the siding pieces of the house right on top of that, making sure that they are pressed down securely. So I ended up not needing that extra kind of weird looking piece, just the four boards were enough. So I'm going to adhere those all down, and then I'm going to take my cutter bee scissors and just trim off all of the excess on the top three sides. And then that is going to give me that scene in the movie, as close to it as I could get anyway. So then I'm going to take the foliage and kind of fill in the area around her a bit, just like it is in the movie. If you pause it, when the camera pans to the Wicked Witch of the East, there's different grasses and plants kind of growing up around the house or kind of sticking up from where the house has landed. So just adding in that to kind of mimic the scene. So I decided that I wanted one of those kind of ivy looking plants to be a bit shorter, and that way I could use half of it for the other side as well. So I just cut that in half, and then I'm going to hide the cut mark behind those little leaves. And then I can use the other part on the opposite side. I just trimmed it out a bit more carefully, and then I'm going to glue that over on the right so that it's kind of running off the edge of the card so it doesn't look like it's been chopped off. And then I'll add that last little bit of grass kind of in front of that as well to just incorporate it a bit more in the scene. So then I needed a sentiment, and I went back and forth between a few. I wanted something that maybe said dropping by to say hi. That was my original direction, but I ended up going with this one from the Scripty Autumn Sentiments. So I'm stamping out the part that says grateful in some Lawn Fawn lobster ink because I wanted something that would tie into the ruby slippers. And then I'm going to heat emboss the rest of the sentiment on some black licorice cardstock. So I'm using my Rabbit Hole Designs embossing powder tool to remove any static cling. And then I'm going to ink that up with some Versamark ink. And I'm stamping out I'm So Very. I did stamp that down twice, but I'm just pressing very lightly. And then I'm going to coat that in some white embossing powder. Make sure that those letters are very well covered, and then tap off any excess from the back. And then I'll bring my heat gun to that. I like to heat it up from the back first and then bring it to the front to melt that embossing powder until it's nice and white and shiny. And then once that has cooled down, I'll take a microfiber cloth, this one's from Pink and Maine, and just buff off any of that remaining powder. For the card base, I decided to go with green to represent the Emerald City, so I'm using cilantro cardstock and Noble Fur ink, and I'm going to stamp the little Scotty dog from Critters at the Dog Park to look like Toto, and I'll continue the sentiment that says, "For friends like you." Then I'm taking one of the pieces from the new Gotta Have Gingham Rainbow 6x6 pad. I'm going to use this blue and white gingham to represent Dorothy's dress. I trimmed that down with the largest of the large stitch rectangle stackables, and I'm going to glue that to my card front. It's going to cover that card base completely because I didn't want that green cardstock showing through on the outside edges. I just want it to be kind of like a surprise when you open up the card. So then I'm going to take the focal panel, and you could prop this up with foam tape if you wanted to, but I decided to glue it flat to the card base because otherwise I would have had to cut down a bunch of tiny foam tape to go behind the sentiment because I knew that was going to hang down off the bottom of that focal panel, and I didn't really want to do that. So I'm going to use some liquid glue to glue that down instead. I'm using my Barely Art glue because it has that really fine nozzle to get behind all of those little letters. And then, like I said, I'm going to center that at the bottom of the panel and have it kind of half on and half hanging off. And then I'll take the I'm So Very and glue that down right above. I thought that sentiment was really appropriate since the Munchkins were so grateful to Dorothy for killing the Wicked Witch of the East, even though she didn't mean to. Of course, the ruby slippers needed some glitter, so I'm just coating them in some Christmas red stickles to give them that bit of sparkle. and I will pick that up to the camera so you can see that a little bit better. My stickles is pretty old, so it was a little bit thick, but and then there's another peek at the inside. So I hope this one was fun for you guys. If it was, please go ahead and hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel and that you've got your notifications turned on so you'll be alerted whenever I post a new video, which is every Monday and Friday. For any of the products, I'll have them all listed and linked for you in the description bar below, so you can click and go. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought might also interest you. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day. Bye-bye.